question I often get when going back to the UK is, what are the Germans really like? And it's an interesting question, one which is pretty difficult to answer. There are so many stereotypes about Germany which just kind of refuse to die. Like, the Germans are tall with blonde hair and blue eyes, or the Germans are direct, cold, and efficient, or they love sausages and beer. And all of these things are kind of problematic for various different reasons. But there are sort of shreds of, I would say, accuracy or truth here and there. So maybe I can't answer the question of what the Germans are really like, but what I can do is I can tell you what Germany and the Germans are not, at least according to my experience after having lived here for over a decade. But before we get started, I would like to address a criticism that I get on here fairly regularly, which is, why do I even talk about the Germans? There is no such thing as the Germans, or why do I talk about Germany? So this is your trigger warning. I will be talking about the Germans and Germany in this video. One thing I will say is that Germany is an incredibly culturally diverse country, which I think is something that most people just don't realize. It's not seen as an immigrant country like the US or to a lesser extent the UK, but immigration has played a huge role in the history of this country. And there have been waves of immigration over the years from Turkey, from Italy, from Poland, from Syria. Even a lot of Americans are now living here. And, as you might expect, a lot of these immigrants move to Western Germany and also cluster around the major cities. So obviously you will have a very different experience of Germany depending on whether you're living in a major city or a small town or village. And just so you know, I live in Frankfurt am Main, and this will obviously, or has obviously, influenced my experience of Germany as a country in general. I think another thing that a lot of people get wrong about Germany is it's not all about the past. A lot of what we learn about, especially in the UK, is really about, Germany's past, and the modern day sort of current country is largely sort of glossed over. And while Germany does have a very complicated, turbulent, also a very interesting history, it is a vibrant modern day country with a thriving economy, with world-renowned cultural institutions, and also cutting-edge technology. However, even though Germany does have a very robust economy and has produced many state-of-the-art products, when it comes to efficiency, I am really not so sure about the accuracy of this stereotype. There is certainly this notion, especially in the UK, that everything just works in Germany. Everything runs like clockwork, people just know what they're doing, and the country is just very efficient. And I am sorry to burst your bubble, but this has not been my experience. But to be fair, efficient or efficiency is a very broad term, especially when applied to a country. It can mean, hundreds of different things, depending on the situation or the experience or what exactly you're talking about. And I know that I've certainly taken some heat, especially for mentioning examples such as the Berlin airport or the Stuttgart train station. And granted, these kind of things can really happen in every country, especially when talking about big, massive projects which involve hundreds of different parties and contractors. It maybe is just a little bit too complicated and is not a fair example when talking about efficiency of the country of Germany in general. However, I think one factor that does need to be taken into account is governance and regulations, and especially when it comes to government bureaucracy, I think it's fair to say that efficiency is definitely not a top priority. Fax machines and sort of paper, physical documents are still a big thing here. And yes, while there are no speed limits on certain sections of the Autobahn, roads get congested and you can spend hours in traffic just like in any other country. It does also depend on which lens you're looking through. And, an example of this, I would say, are airports and travel at the moment. So if you try to take a flight in the last couple of months, you will probably notice that the airports are still understaffed. And you have to get to the airport even earlier these days, just because it takes a little bit longer to get through security because they have, fewer gates open. They could have maybe 20 to 30 possible gates open for a security check, and there's maybe only 5. And this is just highly inefficient from a passenger's perspective. You have to get there earlier, you have to wait longer in the queue, and it might then go quicker than you're expecting, and then you have like an hour and a half wait in the airport. It's very inefficient. But I suppose from the perspective of the airport or the security company, if they want to open more gates, they have to employ more people, and there are sort of rush hours at the airport, so there might be lulls in passenger traffic, where they're paying people to just sort of, idly stand around with nothing to do, which, I suppose from a business perspective is incredibly inefficient, and you're, wasting valuable resources and incurring unnecessary costs. When it comes to Germans as individuals, the individual people that live here in the country, I would say this stereotype of efficiency is slightly more accurate, being very direct, being punctual, getting straight to the point, getting things done. On an individual level, I would say rings a little more true than it does on a countrywide scale. Ultimately, it will all depend a little bit on what you actually do, where you live, which company you work for, and the people you hang around with. Another point to note is that Germany is not Berlin. I find it very refreshing, actually, that Germany does not revolve around the capital city or around one or two key cities, because there's so much diversity here. And one of the questions that I often get when people hear I'm from the UK, the follow-up question is always, pretty much always, are you from London? And I'm like, no, I'm not from London. London is one city in the UK, one of many, many cities. But I have to say that most people really only seem to know London. They've never heard of anything else in the UK. And this is definitely, I would say, not necessarily the case for Germany, but just because it's so diverse. There are a lot of very key cities, like Munich and Hamburg and Frankfurt. Actually, funnily enough, there have been quite a few instances where British football fans have ended up in Frankfurt on the Oder, not Frankfurt in Main. So don't make that mistake next time you travel here, because there are two different Frankfurts. But I find that each city in Germany really has a very distinct culture. They have their own dialect, they have their own food, their own drink, to a certain extent also own sort of musical traditions. And it really is very worth it. It's very important to do your research before moving here, before deciding which city to move to, because, the experiences you have in Berlin and in Munich will be just vastly divergent, almost like living in two separate different countries. So Germany is a very diverse country, and when talking generalizations, there will be certain regions or certain kind of subsets of people that will just fall completely off the scale and won't fit into these generalizations. However, having said that, I do still think that it is possible to talk about this place in generalizations, because there are really certain things which on average are kind of accurate throughout the country. So I do hope that helped to clear up a few things. Have you had maybe a different experience of Germany? If so, let me know in the comments below. Thank you. Bye-bye.